Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of No More Silos. My name is Erica Santiago and this is my podcast. Welcome back everybody. We are excited. I have been since I finished my doctoral work, I've actually had time to pursue all the pet projects that I thought about while I was doing schoolwork. You know, when you have one thing to do, you suddenly think of all the other things that you have to do. When I have an assignment due, it never fails. My house suddenly needs to be cleaned, and I'm going to be the one to do it. Or, you know what? That laundry really should get folded right now. Just procrastinating and putting things off. I don't know about you, but I find that I move around the house during the day like a bee looking for pollen in a field of flowers. I jump from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. I have stacks of books all over the place. And my poor husband, he has been hoping that the stacks of books would go away when I finished school. And actually, they have multiplied. Now, it's not entirely my fault. Several of my friends gave me Amazon gift cards as a congratulatory gift for finishing my doctorate. So there's that. So I've kind of put it on them. And really, I've just, keep telling him, when I was growing up, we had a room that was called the library in our house. It was, I guess, what you would traditionally call a den or an office back then, but it was wall-to-wall books. And so my mom loves books. My dad loves books. I grew up around a lot of books. And so I've tried to share my love of books with my children. Out of the four of them, some have embraced it and some not so much. Or they go in waves. Right now my 12-year-old is not interested in reading. She'd much rather watch YouTube shorts and keep me up to date on all the latest pop culture happenings, which is, of course I appreciate it because I'm not cool anymore. I'm 50. And I'm mom. So somebody's got to keep me up to date, right? Anyway, welcome back to No More Silos. And I have been busy putting together new content for the podcast. And I'm trying to figure out what to do really with the Patreon page, because one of the things I keep thinking about and has really drawn me back into recording again for the podcast is, one, in a previous episode, we talked about, my daughter in college and trying to find a church, and that ended up being a two-parter as far as the episode was concerned because, I try not to belabor the point, but I really wanted to give you a full throttle overview of what finding a new church looks like. So I really hope that was helpful. And so I'm working on a digital download, at least that's what I'm calling it, to kind of give you a checklist that you can look at or share with a friend who might be looking for a new church. But on today's episode, I want to talk to you about what happens when you can't find a church. Then what? What happens if you live in a food desert? Can't find a supermarket. The only thing around is Dollar General, and that's probably not fresh. So then what? What do you do? What if you live in an area because of your job or family and there's just no churches around that you feel like you could really connect to? And there were a couple of things that were driving my thoughts on this. One, I've been thinking about this for a long time. And I finally, in the last couple of weeks, really was able to start putting my thoughts together on it. A few years ago, in 2020, there was an article by Mike Frost on his blog, and he talks about, the article was titled "The Lonely Crowd, Churches Dying Due to Friendlessness." And the thing that I experienced during the pandemic, during the lockdown period of the pandemic, I should say, is in our own church, there were people calling me up saying, "Hey, I've got extra money to buy groceries. I want to buy groceries for that lady who sat in front of me 2 rows up. She usually wore a sweater. Her hair was red. You know who I'm talking about, right?" And I would sit there and I would cringe. And I think I've talked about this on the podcast before too. I would cringe because I'm sitting there going, why don't you know that person's name? And then the other factor, I'm totally an introvert. I'm sort of an extroverted introvert in that I love training and I love speaking, and I don't mind doing public speaking. You hand me a mic, I'm good, but I prefer to be home with my books. And even with this podcast, I have struggled with the idea of, do I want to do a video podcast like I see so many other people doing, or do I just want to stay behind the mic and anonymous? My husband and I have been talking about doing a podcast for literally 2 years, maybe longer. And he is team, because he's totally extroverted. He is all about being team video podcast. But this is a man who gets up every day, gets completely dressed, fixes his hair, everything is done. And even if he has nowhere to go, he's dressed just in case. And then that has a lot to do with how he was raised. But me, I came from a family of, if we're not going anywhere today, we're not dirtying clothes. So, you've got your house clothes, your PJs. I probably have 9 different pairs of yoga pants. Not that I do yoga, but I wear the pants because they're comfy. So in that regard, my husband and I are total opposites. I am looking forward to, I have agreed to go ahead and do a video podcast with him. So be on the lookout for that in the coming months. But with that being said, Mike Frost wrote this article in 2020 about the lonely crowd. And the thing with the pandemic was, for me, it really, really, really drove home the fact that there were people in our small congregation of about 100 folks that really just didn't know each other. And honestly, some of them didn't bother to try. Now, some of it could be it being introverted, which, again, I understand. But some of it really was just, I go to church and I run out the door as soon as I get there because I've made brunch plans. I've got something else to do. So just giving you kind of a highlight of what he talks about, these churches dying due to friendlessness, because people couldn't connect. They couldn't engage with people when they got to the church. And so he talks about, it's not just the church. It could be the person. He cites a 2004 study where 1 out of every 4 of us is walking around with no one to share our lives with. Even though that's 20 years ago, I don't know that we've made it any better between social media and the pandemic. And there's still people in our congregation who have not been able to consistently return to church in person because of health issues, not just because they're older, but because they're immunocompromised. And so there's a challenge that we really have in the body of Christ right now that we're not considering. And I actually think it is even part of the bigger ableism conversation that's going on in disability circles within the church context. So he talks about, this loneliness, and then he talks about, church people, we're not good listeners. So I've been teaching a class at our church this fall, and I've been calling it Seminary Saturdays, and we're covering stuff like, what do you need to know about God? And it's very similar to the traditional catechism scenario that you would have had if you grew up Catholic or Lutheran, just making sure that you knew what was going on. Unlike our friends that are Jewish or our friends that are Muslim, we don't really consistently, as American Christians, especially non-denominational American Christians, we don't do a very good job of teaching our young people or younger Christians, like new Christians, new believers, about Jesus. We just do a really terrible job about that. So my call to action this fall has been to put together materials. And so I'm literally workshopping the class as we speak, teaching it with a group of about 18 people, and at the same time writing and rewriting lessons after we cover it in class on the weekend, because I'm seeing that this is such a big need. And I'm not the only one. I'm not doing this in a silo. There are people, and that's the big thing about No More Silos. we have these buckets of information in this disconnected life. And one of the things that is covered in two of my favorite discipleship books, Emotionally Healthy Discipleship by Pete Scazzaro and The Deeply Formed Life by Rich Villodas, talks about incarnational listening. Incarnational listening. What does it mean to really enter into someone else's world to understand them better? And in Mike Cross' article about loneliness, he points out that listening is not the same as hearing. Therapists refer to something called active listening to distinguish between giving someone your full concentration and just passively hearing them. When we do couples coaching, it's one of those things that we have to coach people on. And it's not just a guy thing, it's women too. We're all looking at our phones, we're all distracted. We've got multiple tabs open in our browsers, literally and figuratively in our minds. And we're always thinking about the next thing, and we're never really present with the people around us. In fact, I was reading, because I'm teaching specifically on discipleship this week, I was reading the Great Commission again, and at the end, I don't know why, but you know how when you spend too much time doing Bible study over the years, you start to have like these throwaway phrases that show up in verses, and you're like, well, that's not the important part, so I'm just going to like ignore that for now. What I'm really focused on is this part. And so in the Great Commission, I have been beating the drum on make disciples. We get caught up in our English translations with the word go, but the actual action verb in the Greek is the making disciples part. Make is the main verb in the sentence. And so when we think about what that main verb really entails in that sentence, in making disciples, it's our imperative to go and to connect with others. It's not just evangelism, it's discipleship. That's the difference between evangelism and discipleship. But a lot of churches, they get stuck on just sharing the gospel with people, and there's no follow through on teaching them to actually follow Jesus's commands. So here's where I thought the throwaway part was. Jesus says, and I'll be with you always. And I usually ignored that, but I had this revelation this week where I was like, you know what? He's talking about incarnational presence. The whole point of the Advent and Christmas story, the way that we read it, God with us, Emmanuel, is Jesus came down and became a human just so that he could really be with us. And then he's telling his followers, hey, I will always be with you. You don't have to worry about that. And I was just sitting there going, oh my God, that's it. It's all about incarnation. So this article, when I looked back at it again, because, you know, I've got this ridiculous Evernote thing, and oh God, the bills coming due soon. They raised their prices, where I'm always taking notes because I use Evernote on my phone and my iPad, and that's my tool. That's my resource where I'm always jotting down things, and then I try to find it all again and put it together and make something useful. But Mike Cross talks about listening. How in the church, we're not really good at listening. And so, you know, he actually makes the suggestion that churches should run regular workshops on listening. But then he also says church people struggle to be vulnerable. And so if you are trying to find a church and you just can't find one, and you're sitting there going, I don't know what to do. Well, one of the challenges in Frost's article is that church people are often the most shamed people. The great enemy is shame. Nothing silences us more effectively than shame, Mike writes. He points out that a lot of our patterns, our learned behavior from the cultural Christian experience is that that we're not good enough. And one of the things, and he quotes one of my favorite folks, Brene Brown, which I've quoted her quite a bit on the podcast. He quotes her as saying, the irony is that the irony is that we attempt to disown our difficult stories to appear more whole or more acceptable, but our wholeness, even our wholeheartedness, actually depends on the integration of all of our experiences, including the falls. So if we can share our story with someone who responds with empathy and understanding, then shame can't survive. If you've got Netflix, check out Brene Brown's talk on Netflix. She talks about and researches in the space of vulnerability. And one of the things that is core to our message here at No More Silos is that we have to integrate our lives, the history, the discipleship, the race and gender, all of the things that make us who we are, our social economic status, our politics, everything about us should make us a whole person. When God created humans, he created a whole person. He didn't create a child and wait for it to grow up. He created a whole person. But when Jesus came in human form, he started out as a baby. Why? Because God trusted Mary to raise him right. And so there's all of these pieces that are starting to come together, that Jesus is with us. He was with us incarnationally. That was the whole point. But then we are expected to do what he did. We are expected to live out that incarnational life. No silos, no more silos. But here's the thing, church people need to be less busy. That's what Mike talks about. So we're trying to find a new church, but we get there and all these people are busy. They've got kids in sports. They've got kids in performing arts activities. They're running out the door for brunch and no one stops and really talks. And here's the thing, that if you're going to a new church and you followed everything that we talked about in the last episode, please understand, friendships take time. There are some folks in our church that if you had asked me 10 years ago if they were going to stick, I would have kind of shrugged my shoulders and been like, well, I hope so. And now they're some of our best friends, because in the body of Christ, you need friends. It's that love one another, not love one another from a distance and I only see you because, once a week. It's we're doing life together. It's not just programs at churches, although in our American context, that's what we hinge on. And then the other thing, too, is that it shouldn't just be on the newcomer. So if you feel like you have been trying to find a new church and you're just not able to connect with people, and maybe it's not even a whole loneliness thing, it really may just be on the church. And if you know in your church, you see people running for the parking lot as soon as church is over, maybe cut them off at the chase, not to knock them over and make them late for their brunch reservation, certainly, but at least engage before they get out the door and say, hey, I hope you'll be back next week. Here's my number. Maybe we can connect. Because people coming to a new church, that's a huge step. It really is. And, in the old school church, we sang a song, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and Mike reminds us of it in this post. And really, it's a two-way street. It's how we love one another, how we love others, and that's how we demonstrate our love for God. So how did I get to where I'm at now with what do we do if you can't find a church? Well, it's funny you should ask. I'm so glad you asked that question. In Scott McKnight's Substack, and he wrote, I think I recommended the book recently, Revelation for the Rest of Us, which I think is really great. I would definitely recommend this book, especially from a discipleship standpoint. It'll completely change your thinking or help you clarify some things about Revelation, because that's another book that we often skip over because it seems complicated, or it's been presented to us as if it is, and it really isn't. It's complicated, but not that complicated if you have some information to kind of start with. So Scott McKnight last week talked about, actually on his newsletter, it was actually written by Mike Glenn. I have no idea who Mike Glenn is. Probably should have looked into that before I talked about this. But anyway, The article title is Got a Bible, Church Over Coffee. And the whole point of the article is this, that when we say we can't find a church, we shouldn't fret. Because as followers of Jesus, we are completely empowered and still commanded to go and make disciples, with or without a local church. And so what do? We can start our own Bible study. And the article even addresses the fact that, or the question of heresy, like, but what if we go off the deep end and we start, reading something crazy? Well, there's plenty of resources out there. But one of the things that I feel called to in this season is to start creating some resources for specifically folks maybe like you listening right now who can't find a church, and you're listening to the No More Silos podcast going, I'm trying to deconstruct my faith. I'm trying to reconstruct it, but I don't really know how. And the churches I'm going to are either still in the past and culturally Christian and doing stuff that I just don't believe anymore, or there isn't a church near my house. Because here's the thing. One of the reasons we started our church over a decade ago was because we looked around at the churches that were in our immediate community, within a 5-mile radius. And we were like, we don't really want to go to any of them. Either it wasn't that we didn't like the leadership or didn't have friends at some of these other churches. It was literally either theologically we weren't on the same page, or it was too homogenous one way or the other. And we just didn't feel like that was our connection. And as a result of that and some other factors that went into all this, of course, we were called to start our own church. Now, you may be thinking, all I want to do is start a Bible study. Why are we talking about starting a church? No, I'm not saying start a church, but a lot of churches start out as Bible studies. There's this whole movement right now, you can look it up on Google, of house churches. Because that's what's going on in the New Testament, house churches. Everybody's church is not in a building. We don't have buildings for like 500-600 years, really. We have house churches. And when the house churches get too big for the person's house, then we start a new one. And so there's this cycle and process and workflow that developed of equipping the saints to do ministry. And we see that in Ephesians chapter 4. The point is we're supposed to equip folks. So what I want to do is create resources for this that look at things from the perspective of deconstructing and reconstructing my faith, because that is the lane that I'm called to personally. I feel that that's what I'm here for. And so what I want to recommend, just starting out, if you're going to start a Bible study, start it with a book. And Pete Scazzaro, Rich Villodas' books, Emotionally Healthy Discipleship and The Deeply Formed Life are great books to begin a Bible study with. And start with your friends. Start with people that you know. Start with your coworkers. Start with your neighbors. I'll tell you what, when my younger son was 5 and it was in kindergarten, I made the intentional effort, even with my introverted self, I made the intentional effort to make friends with some of the other moms in his class. And part of it was, ministry. And some of it was, I just want to know who my kid is going to come home and say, hey, can I have a play date with this other kid? And so it was cool because I found the other Christian moms. Now, granted, here in the South, you can always find somebody who says they're a Christian. And so what we did was we formed a Bible study. And we picked a book in the New Testament, and we decided we were going to read it together and talk about it over coffee once a week. And we rotated houses. It was that simple. Now, if you were not a stay-at-home mom, and that may not be something for you, again, coworkers, work, and even people that you might it might be friends with on social media. Don't knock the online Bible study. There's quite a few thriving groups out there that are doing on social media platforms that are doing Bible studies. And so you can use social media tools to walk through a weekly Bible study for 30 minutes or an hour and just give people a chance to ask questions. And if you don't know the answer, you can use tools like the blueletterbible.org to look things up. Bible Project is a great resource. You can watch a Bible Project video and then discuss it. And oftentimes with the video, they have discussion questions you can take a look at. You can go and look for, other resources for your favorite authors, and just have conversations about it. You can even take a book about whatever and talk about how does that spiritually form us in our minds? Like where is that taking us? What are we thinking about with that? In fact, Deeply Formed Life has a YouVersion Bible plan. And so you can go through a Bible plan on YouVersion, and Plans with Friends is a feature that they've had for a few years now. And so you can start your own group. And as soon as I get my website where I want it to be again, I will probably post some more details on what it takes to start your own Bible study. Because it might be that you're just simply looking to deepen your faith and connect with other like-minded individuals. Or you're just unable to find a church that aligns with your beliefs as you're deconstructing and reconstructing your faith. And so you simply want to create a more intimate and personalized spiritual experience. So here's the thing, the big step one, looking at its big picture. What do I need to do to start my own Bible study? First thing you need to do, you've got to put in a little bit of preparation. You got to decide what you're going to what your point is, like a purpose and vision. And I know that sounds pretty corporate and bland, but here's the thing. You want to have a purpose and vision. Like, is the point of your study group to deepen your understanding of Scripture? Is it to address your own reconstructing faith as you've been deconstructing, to help someone else who's deconstructing and become a safe space for spiritual growth, or is it just to foster a sense of community? Remember, we talked about that article on loneliness from 2020. Is it that, I just don't have people that I'm doing life with, and I really just want to foster a sense of community? So maybe 15 minutes of it is going to be Bible study, but the rest of it is, hey, how was your week? What's going on in your world? And maybe not for questions being answered, but as much as I just want to share my life with someone else. That's incarnational living, right? So your vision and purpose, like what are we trying to do here? And then decide on your format. Is it going to be an online group? Is it going to be offline? Is it going to be in person? Are you going to meet at Starbucks? Is it going to be in the middle of the day or just on weekends? Are you going to host it? So thinking about format, thinking about location. If you're going to host it or you're picking Starbucks, what's your group size going to be? Now, if you're online, of course, it's open to everybody, but maybe you don't want it open to everybody. Maybe you say, hey, everybody who signs up for it, we're going to have a cutoff, and our cutoff is first 10 people who sign up, because that makes it unwieldy if the group size is too big. The second big step is finding your community, like finding the right community of individuals who share your passion for spiritual growth. So it might be that if you already have a church, you might want to just connect with other people. We have, and a lot of non-denominational churches have their small group system set up where people can come to leadership and say, you know what, I want to start a small group that's a workout group. We have one right now that's thriving. And that person who's leading it, he works out every day anyway. So 3 times a week, he's working out with other people at the church. And it's going great. So how do you want to, who's your community? Who do you want to connect with? It could be something that's non-traditional. It could be coworkers. It could be friends or neighbors. How do you want to use social media and online platforms like Zoom? Zoom is free for the first 30 minutes. And so that might be something that you want to consider. What's your schedule, your frequency, how long, and then you think about, your study material. That's step 4. Selecting your study material. Study guides and devotionals. Like I said, I'm working on creating some content that specifically focuses on deconstructing and reconstructing your faith that I recommend. But there's popular study guides by renowned authors like Beth Moore, Priscilla Shirer that exist out there. There's study guides for emotionally healthy discipleship and deeply formed life that you can connect with. Carmen Joy Imes' book, Being in God's Image, that I talked about the other week. The book itself is a study guide. There's literally QR codes connected to or focused on Bible Project videos. So, you've got that resource. So study guides and devotionals, book studies, or you can just read the Bible and use blueletterbible.org to do your own word studies and look things up and say, you know what, I'm wondering how this would work for us. And then step 5, actually doing it, right? You're facilitating discussion and growth. So you want to encourage active participation. It's not the Erica show. You're getting feedback from other people, so you want to build in time for that to create an inclusive atmosphere where everyone feels comfortable sharing their thoughts and their insights. And there's no wrong answer. I mean, there's heretical answers, certainly, and I guess that would be wrong technically. But there's, how we respond to that in love and kindness and the fruits of the Spirit to say, you know what, let's look that up together. Let's see if this is a factual statement. Let's see if this is true. Are we reading something into this eisegetically and not exegetically? And most importantly, foster those authentic relationships. Emphasize application and accountability. Now, everything you read may not apply to you. Everything I read doesn't always apply to me. As I've matured in my faith, I'm not, super Christian right now. I mean, there's still stuff I can apply. There's still stuff I can learn. There's still stuff I can relearn. I mean, I just told you, I just realized what the last part of the Great Commission, Jesus is going to be with us always. So don't knock yourself and your ability to apply things, but set goals. Check in with one another to make sure people are progressing, that they're growing. One of the things and I was just having a meeting with someone yesterday about this, that I find heartbreaking as a pastor, and I really do. I find it heartbreaking as a pastor to see someone not grow spiritually because of a lack of engagement in the body of Christ. Like they're good with the friends and the network and the circle of folks that they have in their lives right now, and they don't participate in anything the church has to offer, or if they do, it's very peripheral and not really connecting with people in a live life together type of way. And I get it. Cults have made a lot of Christian churches look really bad. There have been a lot of problematic folks. And that's why No More Silos exists, right? Because I want you to learn what is the authentic relationship that we should be having with Christ. Now, here's something else. If you've done everything we've already talked about, right? You've set a location, you figured out what you're going to talk about, you've identified your community. Step 6 is engaging in service and outreach. You know what? You may, as a group, decide, hey, we want to connect with others in a meaningful way in our community. A vital aspect of discipleship is actually putting your faith into action by serving others and engaging in outreach activities. And so some ways that your Bible study group can engage in community service is to connect with your local outreach organizations. There are folks out there who have 501c3s that are doing things like, soup kitchens and food banks. And here in Atlanta, we have a group that sends books to Africa. And they literally, it's not that they're just collecting the books and asking you to donate, but you could literally go to their office and just pack the books in the boxes. Like they need people to come do that. In the wintertime, there's folks that need folks to help put together packages of food for food banks or get this stuff organized. You may have an accounting background. You can donate some of your bookkeeping services to a 501c3 and write it off for your business. So there's so many ways that you can engage in service and outreach, not just as an individual, but with your new Bible study group that you've just created, right? Because all it takes is a cup of coffee. So what does your community need? You can research and identify specific needs. And here's something that's really important. Sometimes those needs evolve over time. Like periodically, we call our local schools and ask, hey, what is it you guys need in this season? There was a period of time in the last couple of years where our local high school, because of the pandemic, had turned off all the water fountains in the building. And then they were doing a lot of construction. And so that got extended, not so much because of the pandemic issue and a health-related issue, but more because they were just doing construction. So they encouraged kids to bring water bottles to school, and there were a few water bottle filling stations. But what they really needed was bottled water. And so we would order a pallet of water off of Costco's website and just send it over to the school. And we encouraged others to do that. Maybe your group could all chip in and do something like that, or go and physically volunteer at a local soup kitchen or a community cleanup day. Any one of your local schools will have this stuff posted on their website, and you just get your group together and contact them and say, hey, where do we need to show up and what time? We'll be there. But by volunteering together, though, your group can bond while making a positive difference in the lives of others. And when I tell you that's a total adrenaline rush, after helping out at Habitat for Humanity or working in a food kitchen or something, it's just really, it feels good. It does. It really feels good to do that. And being a Christian, one of the historical things, and in an upcoming episode, I'm going to talk about Christian history a little bit, because I think I've covered some of it before, but one of the things that I realized recently as I've been talking with folks who are deconstructing and reconstructing their faith are a lot of questions around why we do some of the stuff we do. And one of the things that the early church did is they were known for their charity. Like, this wasn't a thing before Christianity. So sharing your faith through acts of kindness is a great way to nurture and grow your group. So the last thing I want to mention, or actually last two things, is what does it take to nurture and grow your group? Yeah, you could go and volunteer, but maybe you're an online group, so volunteering might take a little bit more creativity than what you're ready for yet. But regular communication is going to be important. Evaluate how things are going after a few weeks. Celebrate milestones and achievements. One of the things you can celebrate, and we focus on this in our small group context in our church, is celebrate the wins, like how someone was doing that week, but also, hey, have you been baptized? Let's get you baptized. Let's figure out how we can do that and celebrate that. That for your group members, reaching personal goals, completing a study, making a significant impact in your community. You want to acknowledge and affirm the progress that you've made, and as a group and also as individuals. Or just things like, hey, I got a promotion at work. Somebody celebrate with me. Somebody care. Just looking at spiritual disciplines, helping everybody deepen their discipleship journey as individuals. And these disciplines include things like prayer and meditation, reading scripture daily, maybe fasting. And fasting may not be food. Some people have medical issues or medical challenges with fasting food. So maybe it's, I need to fast social media for a month, or I need to fast coffee or something. Although as much as I drink coffee, we've decided that fasting coffee is probably not a good idea for me. Or journaling, getting a journal and writing in your journal about your reconstructing process. What are the new things you're realizing? What are the old things you're letting go of? A great book that you could also treat it like a devotional for reconstruction is the series What If Jesus Was Serious by Skye Jitani. In one of the books I have actually sitting here in front of me is What If Jesus Was Serious About the Church? As you're deconstructing your faith, we realize that there's things that are going on in our churches that, oh my gosh, did they just make that up? But they made it up 2 generations ago and nobody remembers how it started, and we just do it and we get stuck there. So seek guidance and mentorship, either through the books that you're reading or reach out to someone, a local pastor or someone in your church, if you've got a church. But if you don't have a church, the last church you went to, and say, hey, I moved away, but I want to start a Bible study group in my new city. What do you recommend? What are some ways, hopefully someone, or you can seek out someone who can mentor you. And they would be able to help you with valuable insights and resources and just support to encourage you as you create a transformative experience for your group members. And so those are some of the things I'm going to work on getting those details up on the blog on my website, hopefully sooner than later. But so what do you do if you can't find a church? Well, just where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, in Jesus' name, you can have your own little Bible study. And do that until you're able to find the right church for you. So thanks for listening. Have a great rest of your day and be blessed. And thank you again for listening to No More Silos.